Buenos dias, good morning, welcome. My name is Patricia Mota, President and CEO for the Hispanic Alliance for Career Enhancement, and welcome to Cafecito con ACE. For those of you joining us for the first time, welcome to the ACE Familia. ACE is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing Latinos in the workplace. And today we have our special guest and longtime ACE friend, ACE National Board of Director, who will be transitioning to our advisory council and also serves as Vice President of Human Resources at AMLI Residential. Buenos dias, Martha. How are you today?
Buenos dias. Muy bien. Hot outside, but doing great. Great to be here.
Martha, it's good to see you. I know we're used to see each other throughout the year, and we're still overdue for connecting in person soon. And maybe a golf outing at some point, right, Martha? I know we weren't able to make this last one.
Absolutely.
Hey, absolutely. So, hey, those of you tuning in, have your questions and comments ready. We want to engage. We're talking on a very hot topic today regarding the shift of the future of work and how folks are choosing to work and the great resignation, as some are calling it, with recent articles and publications that have been out there lately. But Martha, before we get started, this is Cafecito con ACE. How do you prefer your cafe in the morning or your morning beverage of choice?
So I love coffee. It has to be strong, and I don't add sugar because I feel like you're taking away the flavor of the cafecito. And I like a little cream, not a lot of cream. Again, I like the taste of the coffee. And that's how I enjoy my cafecito, and I'm enjoying one right now with my AMLI cup.
Salud and buenos dias a todos. Thank you for joining us. I see you all commenting there in the chat. So Martha, as you know, having been involved with ACE for so long, I mean, you're also one of our Mujeres de ACE alum from one of our very first cohorts, whereas we first connected when I first started at ACE in 2010. We like to showcase who our ACE Familia is, and most importantly, ensure that they're sharing their personal and professional stories. So Martha, who is Martha Arteaga? How did you get to where you are today?
So I was born in Mexico in a small little town called La Moncada, very, very small town, very poor town. And so when my father passed away, we emigrated to the United States with my mother. And there's 8 of us, so 4 and 4, the Mexican Brady Bunch, if you want to call it. So we came here, and, you know, this was, obviously I was a very young kid. And there was this just courage and integrity that was instilled in me by my mother. And I actually wrote a book, Adios Eva, which talks about my mom's trajectory and her experience as an immigrant and our experience as an immigrant. So I think that early on, I knew that education and working hard was important. And very young, I had set goals for myself that I always wanted to do the best. I wanted to be number one. I wanted to break the barriers. And I saw, we went through some personal struggles. So I think that also molded me in the person that I am today, that has helped me be resilient, which I do believe resiliency is one of the critical traits of a successful leader. And boy, did we need to be resilient during this past couple years, right? So then I my background is law and real estate. I thought I'd be a lawyer. Can you imagine? And then I realized after working in various law firms that that's not what I wanted to do. And I fell in love with HR. I've been in human resources over 20 years now. And, it's one of those things where I still get to do a lot of law, because I have to be honest that in the world today, the HR professionals probably need a law degree. There are so many laws that are changing. And so I do think I'm still kind of, having my cake and eating it too, for sure, in that I do a lot of compliance and law, but also I'm part of the human capital aspect of the company. But, I'd say that I have traditionally risen up the ladder. I've, climbed the ladder. I started out from the bottom up, and I have, been promoted many times. And I do say that networking, that your outside sponsors and mentors are so incredibly important in that aspect of your life, and have been for me. ASE has been a big part, and that's why I continue to give back, why I continue to be a part of ASE. I will be a forever ASE person, by the way. And anyone listening today who hasn't been a part of ASE, I strongly encourage you to get involved any way you can, because it has had a big impact on me, from the leadership development with Mujeres de ASE, to being on the board of directors, to now going into the advisory council, and just participating in, giving back and helping others. I think for me has been probably the culmination of my career, is helping other people get to where they want to be, giving them advice, sharing my knowledge, sharing my career highs and lows. All of that has been fantastic.
And you are a true testament to all of that, Martha. Since I've known you, since I started at ASE, not only obviously you've been actively involved, but and speaking at events and doing things, but you give so much. I mean, obviously me tapping into you with your HR expertise and being able to support things for our organization and in strengthening our capacity, from like our HR employee handbooks to all of that. But even when you were, and many of my favorite memories of the things that you've done for ASE is when we launched our first ever Mujeres de ASE, which is now considered alumni board, our auxiliary board. You helped every woman on that board update their bio, right? And taking the time, and that's what we do. That's part of the ASE Familia. And I'm just so appreciative of you going above and beyond, especially in being such in a senior executive level role and continuously progressing in your career. I just want to give all the kudos and thank you. I saw a couple comments, Andres, and excited about the topic that we have today. And especially with all of the challenges that we've had with the world beginning to open up, employers making decisions on how to accommodate employees, the future of work. What have you seen as some of the biggest challenges employers are facing? And I do want to note two specific articles. One about 2 weeks ago was by NPR, titled The Great Resignation. And ever since I've seen that, I see that everywhere now in articles and in commentary. But one of the highlights from that specific article said that we've had the most people resign their roles in the last 2 decades that we've seen. And then the second article that I just saw yesterday was regarding Apple. Apple's implementing a 3-day remote work policy, so 3-day in the office or vice versa, right? Where they're requiring folks to come in. And some folks are like, I can go 100% remote, right? And so there's pushback with Apple executives in that decision and being such a tech company. So with all that being said, what are you seeing as some of the biggest challenges and the biggest fears that employees are facing at this point?
Look, I have to say that we can probably talk about challenges from Cafecito to happy hour, because there are a lot. And I do think that you bring up a great point with the Great Resignation. Employers, as they're coming back, they're reopening, even if that means they're still remote, but their companies are now doing more business than they were during the pandemic. There's this flow of, people leaving. There's this exodus of people just leaving companies. Why? You think about everything that some of these employees went through during COVID, especially, when you look at the disparate impact COVID had on some of our people. I'm talking about the Black, brown people, and also the maybe not highly educated people. Those were the ones that found themselves without a job. Those were the ones that had to make a decision of not working, going furlough, accepting a furlough or going on unemployment. And so a lot of them for the first time had an opportunity to work, from home or not work at all and be a part of their family that they were missing because they were working these long hours, these long shifts. And so there was this, awakening for them, like, wow, what have I been missing all of this time? I now have time to actually have dinner with my family. I actually have time to spend with my small children. I can help them. We had a lot of kids at home, remote learning. How many parents were the teacher at the time, right? And so I think that you had some people who really lives were impacted to the point where they did not want to go back to that same environment environment. And so what are we seeing? That's impacting this labor shortage of workers in the front line. So for like my company is a property management company. Where do we see this? We see these with our maintenance employees, our porters, housekeepers, service technicians, and even frontline supervisors. There's a shortage of them because now some companies are paying them a lot more money. And so they're leaving for a company that perhaps maybe valued them more. You also have employees who felt like companies didn't treat them properly during the pandemic. They didn't like the way they handled COVID situations. They didn't feel valued. So now you have these individuals, possibly, maybe some of them went back to school. You had schools like Harvard and Stanford offering much cheaper tuition for online training and online schooling. So there were these opportunities that open up the doors for some people and change their entire career. You see people changing careers. So what are the challenges that these companies are facing? These skill gaps. And so now we really have to pivot and decide, how do I hire? So what's changing? Recruitment is changing. How you recruit, where you recruit, the type of roles. I can tell you that my company has never really had a lot of turnover in the corporate sector. And we saw a lot of that post-COVID, or at least during COVID. And I suspect that a lot of other companies are experiencing the same thing. And so you end up actually hiring different types of individuals than you originally had in those roles. And then you also mentioned the remote flex work, right? Mm-hmm. People are refusing to come back to an environment where they have to be 9 to 5 or they have to come into an office. Some of these companies that have been, they have been straightforward from the beginning, saying we're going to have a plan in place, and at some point we're going to come back. They may have experienced that turnover over time. Employers who maybe were not communicating it, and then all of a sudden said, "Hey, you guys have to come back. Everybody's got to come back to work." All of a sudden, they have this turnover and they're having a difficult time running their business. Think about how that impacts their business as well. I also think that mental health is something that employers have not really been paying attention to. My company did an employee survey at the beginning of the year, 2020. And, there were a lot of things that we felt we did well and a lot of things that surprised us. And one of the things that I think we didn't realize, we knew, but didn't realize how important and how critical it was, the mental health of every single one of our employees. And so I'm really hoping that employers are doing more than just providing an EAP number for their employees, but providing resources for mental health and well-being, not just physical well-being and not just medical, but seriously, mental health has got to be a part of their initiative going forward, not just for now, but, forever.
Yeah. And we're going to get to some of the questions. We see one from one of our colleagues, actually, as an HR representative. How do you encourage employees to stay? But I do want to summarize some of the things that you just mentioned before you get to that question, because I heard, the wages, right, being an impact, employees not feeling valued, the new training offerings and being able to reskill, retrain, refusing to work at a 9 to 5 remote, and then mental health being a big one. And for those of you that may not know, EAP is Employee Assistance Program, and as referred to as EAP within some of these companies. And so all that being said, I mean, recommendations, and one of them being, do you encourage for employees, but also for employers to ensure that parties could adjust, right? Mm-hmm. What would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, one of the things that my company did really well is we established a task force literally in March 2020. And it can't be just HR. HR cannot solve all the problems. You can't go to HR to solve all the problems in the company, because you have a lot of stakeholders and you have a lot of different leaders that have an impact on a different group of people. And so that's the whole thing with inclusion and diversity, is that your frontliners or employees who may not have access to CEOs or executives, they want to be able to trust that person, their supervisor. So I think that one of the things we did really well is we established this task force of different individuals across the company that had a say-so and that were important for the well-being of all, that, collaboratively. I want to say, besides the board of directors for ACE, where I think we have done such an incredible job collaborating, this is probably the best group of leaders that I've collaborated with. And so I think that employers need to understand that they need to be inclusive in these task forces that they develop, so that they're really taking into account everyone that's on their team, not just the big players, or not just the people that are producing revenue, that are bringing money into the company. So that's one thing. The second thing is we need to really be empathetic and understand what are the needs. And so by doing some type of pulse survey, and I don't mean just, it's kind of like putting out a statement saying, oh, we support this, we support that, and then you don't do anything. Doing an employee survey, doing questionnaires, it doesn't have to be a fancy one, but actually looking at it and have an action plan. So this is challenging, Patricia, during the time that you're really trying to run a business, and you don't have extra resources. This is a challenge for employers, I think. And so they have to really be thoughtful about what they're promising, so that they can, really then impact employees. And then at the end of, assessing what the needs of employees are, which we saw, you have to listen, and then you have to have a realistic plan on what's going to have the most impact. What is the most important thing for these employees now? And you have to fight your battles. What roles do you really have to bring everyone back into the office? Can you be a little bit lenient with certain roles? Does it make sense for a certain IT person to really be in the office? What are their contributions going to provide in any way? And so I think that that's the tough part, is when the employers have to make a decision on, do we go remote? Do we go flex? What groups are going to be impacted? And the only way that you can be successful in the, navigating through this is by understanding what your employees feel and think, and by listening.
Yeah. Excellent points. And we have a question on the first one, the recommendation that you had from one of our LinkedIn colleagues here regarding the task force. But just to summarize, I'm hearing around the task force that was developed. Empathetic leadership is a big one that we're hearing so much about, even wanting the need for more training regarding that. And listening is a lot easier said than done, right? But it really active listening to ensure that it's a realistic plan that's impactful. So that's all from the employer end. And the question that we have is, what type of activities did the task force organize?
Well, activities, when we were in COVID and everyone was locked down, a lot of what was really important was finding ways to ensure that employees were connecting. So we actually rolled out Teams and Yammer. And so Yammer is kind of a mini Facebook, but, more corporate and work appropriate, where we shared stories, where we highlighted, individuals working, with their masks. Because remember, a lot of our corporate employees were working from home, but our frontliners weren't. Our leasing consultants, even though our offices were closed and we were doing virtual touring, because we're a property management company, we still had our service techs, our housekeepers, our groundskeepers working every day. And this was, really tough. So we had to find ways. So besides activities, we just had to find ways to connect, to value them, to highlight them, and ways to make them whole. I think that a lot of the time that we spent behind closed doors was wondering, how can we keep and save everyone's job? How can we ensure that we don't have to do pay cuts? How do we keep them whole during this process? And how do we give them more? Because guess what? We had already given up on financials. We already knew that we were at a loss and there was nothing we could do. We were not going to make our goals financially. So we had to go to what's the most important thing besides, generating revenue is our people. So there weren't a lot of activities we could do because of the social distancing and all of those things. Now, we've had a nice welcome back to our corporate offices, and we've rolled out, a lot of other fun things that we typically do on site for our teams, like our mid-year awards. I think we did a really great job of pivoting those annual awards, those mid-year awards that were in person, those leadership conferences, those summits, to virtual. And that was still a way, the chat function for most has been really great. They can do the gifts, they can, they can still participate, kind of like what we're doing today. Patricia, I think ASA did an excellent job with our summit, virtually. So those are some of the things.
That's one thing we learned, is how to pivot. And one thing, you talked a lot about through the examples is the equity. We've been talking a lot about equity this year. ASIB, our theme being we lead at the intersection of identity, equity, and unity, where you talked about meeting employees where they are, right? In terms of which roles need to be 100%, can be 100% remote, which roles do we need in the office every so often. So that's more on that piece. I do want to ask one last question, or two more last questions before we wrap up. One is on the employee end. As an employee, what tips do you have to advocate for ourselves, advocating for our own needs, right? Because one thing is the employer surveying and getting data and asking questions, but also on our end as an employee of an organization, what tips do you have to ensure that you're asking the right questions, that you're sharing what your needs are?
Yeah, I think I always say this in any type of participation or training or anything that I do is, the introverts need a voice. I think that our extroverted individuals are very comfortable raising their hand and going to the right people, finding the resources to speak up. And I think that our introverted people are typically the ones that stay behind. They either stay content or they don't say anything. So this is definitely, I think, for those introverted individuals, is that you have to find your voice. You have to do your research on what is available in your company, what resources, who can you talk to, what's your open door policy. Look at your job description. You have your job description. This is not a secret. What are the physical requirements of the job? What are the requirements of the job, so that you can be, you can have a good conversation with someone seriously about, does my job need to be remote or not? And you have to also be prepared for some disappointment. And guess what? It may be that you end up leaving the company. And that's what employers are seeing, right? But it doesn't mean you may find something, you may not find the same situation somewhere else. So I think that you have to do your research before you quit your job. We have these unemployment benefits right now extended through September. So we see a labor shortage. I think that we're going to start seeing more viable candidates out there in October, when these extra unemployment benefits end. And so the timing is important for an employee as well, when to, right now it's definitely a candidate market, but in a couple of months, I think it's going to shift. And I think it's going to be more an employer market. And so the timing of when you leave a company is really important. And I would say just not only find someone you trust in the organization that can help you, but find someone outside of the organization who maybe has access to some of these things. So I know
you're spot on, Martha. You had so many excellent tips and advice. I hope you all were taking notes. Please connect with Martha on LinkedIn. Continue to engage in the chat if you have any additional questions or comments. And one last question, and we'll wrap it up, Martha, is what are you most hopeful for the remainder of this year?
I'm really hopeful that all the lessons we've learned, and even with all this social and injustice that we saw and everything that's happened over the last year, I really hope that this provides some change, not just for employees, but for employers, and that it's not just a knee-jerk reaction to what's happened over the last year, but that we really come to a good place. I see some things that are happening that are positive, and I look forward to just being a part of that and continuing to do that. So, and then continuing to pass that down. But that's what I'm hopeful for in the next years.
And I know you will continue to be a part of it. Martha, as always, mil gracias. Un abrazo bien fuerte. Thank you for everyone for tuning in. Hasta la próxima. Take care.
Gracias.
Bye.